Good day, our viewers and listeners. This is Dr. Kaveh Elahiun coming to you guys with another fantastic interview brought to you guys by Wellness Influencers. Today we have my colleague, Dr. Stephen Franson. There we go. He's on there with us. He is one of my very knowledgeable colleagues that he has joined us today. He has been recognized as the most top 25 influential chiropractors in 2017. And we're going to be talking a bunch of topics here which are relevant to today's days and what's going on. So we will have Dr. Stephen start introducing himself, tell us what he's doing and how he goes about doing it.
Dr. Kaveh, is that correct?
That's right.
Look at that, I got your name right. So we were teasing each other beforehand because my first name is usually pretty easy to say. Kaveh is a little bit of a side one. So just for our listeners here, it's Stephen, right? Stephen Franson. So, hey, we just met and it was great to get connected with you, doctor, just beforehand. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be on here. I just love having the opportunity to speak to chiropractors and to really to people in general. So thanks so much for asking me to join you.
Thank you very much. So we're going to dive right into it. Stress. Everybody is stressed. Everybody is trying to manage this stress. What does stress does to our body and why?
So Kaveh, this is the topic, right? So you know what, frankly, if you had interviewed me 3 weeks ago before, this crisis, we probably would have been able to have the same conversation, right? You thought you were stressed before, so it's almost this badge of courage that the modern human, carries around with them, how busy they are and how stressed they are. I think we can all agree that, we're stressed, life is more stressful, even if you love your life, right? So even if you love your life, like I love my life, but just the speed of our life now and the demands of our life, being a parent, being a busy parent, being a spouse, being a business owner, right? So being a coach and just the interactions. I know you know what I'm talking about. We're all feeling stressed. And for most people, in my experience, if you ask them, do you think you're more stressed than you were a year ago? Of course, this week, everybody says yes. You could say a month ago. Now, do you think you're going to be more stressed next year? Yes, I definitely think I am. I see the trend of where it's going because life just keeps getting busier. And then I'll ask them, do you understand that stress, unwanted stress, especially chronic stress, makes you sick? Do you understand that, right? Most lay people will say, yeah, I totally get that. I'm super stressed and I understand that chronic stress makes you sick. And then I'll ask them, do you know what system in your body helps you cope with and adapt to and deal with stress and thrive despite the stress in this modern, lifestyle? And across the board, everybody gives you the blank stare. Nobody knows what system in the body helps you deal with stress. Like we know what system in the body helps you deal with food, right? And digestive system. What system in the body helps you deal with mobility, right? So your musculoskeletal system. What system in your body helps you deal with infection, like your immune system? But then you ask them, what system in your body helps you deal with stress? Blank stares, nobody knows. So I'd love to use this time right now to say, let's talk about this thing called stress. Let's talk about how your body in a natural and healthy state will deal with and cope with stresses. And also, if you're not coping with or dealing with stresses properly, what are the physiological and health implications of that?
Fantastic. Now, let's dive into what stress is, what type of stresses do we have, and then we will go into how it affects our system and our body.
Great. So the system in the body that helps you cope with and deal with stress and thrive in stress is your nervous system, right? So the nervous system working with your endocrine system and as well as your immune system really helps you relate to your environment. Your internal and external environment is really dynamic, right? So there are different stressors that we're going to happen upon in just naturally, right? And life can be stressful, and this is meant to be ups and downs of stress, right? But there's one system in particular that helps us cope with stress, and that's the autonomic nervous system, right? The autonomic nervous system is really designed to help coordinate the physiology of the body. Now, think of the autonomic nervous system as almost like the brakes and the gas, right? So the autonomic nervous system really operates in either what's called sympathetic or parasympathetic stimulation, right? Or a state. In sympathetic, this is when we go into a fight or flight response, whereas parasympathetic is the rest, the repair, the digestion, reproduction state, right? So you're either in fight or flight, or you are in the rest and repair state, right? Never at the same time, right? So it's one or the other. And the body really switches back and forth. Now, that fight or flight response is totally natural and absolutely necessary in many situations where we have to perform, either perform to fight or flee. This is a survival mechanism. You know, a great analogy is if a tiger was attacking you, your body would shift into a sympathetic fight or flight state. Hopefully you choose to flee versus fight, right? But you'd be out of there and all of your physiology would shift and change. So what ends up happening when your body senses some type of threat, everything changes, and there's this whole cascade, this chemical cascade, neurological cascade that happens in the body, and you get stress hormones dumping in your system that changes all your physiology, and you adapt, right? So your blood pressure goes up, your heart rate goes up, your eyes dilate, you narrow your focus, right? You dump energy substrates into the blood like sugar, cholesterol is dumped into the blood for hormone production and as well as for healing, clotting factors in case you get attacked by the tiger, etc. And all the energy of the body, so to speak, shifts into fight or flee state. And this is exactly appropriate, right? So this is what happens when you're under a threat and you have to get out of there. That stressed state is totally natural and healthy. It'll save your life, right? In an acute situation. But after the threat resolves, we're supposed to set back to parasympathetic into rest and repair state. In parasympathetic, this is where the healing happens, right? When you end up diverting all of the energy from your systems towards, like, say, for example, your musculoskeletal system when you're in fight or flight, certain other systems have energy, if you will, robbed from them, okay? So we downregulate certain systems. Like we slow down digestion. You don't need to be digesting and breaking down foods at that point. You need to be running away from the tiger. You're not thinking about reproduction, so let's get the energy out of the reproductive system. And also your immune system. Your immune system actually gets downregulated when you're in that stressed state because your immune system is an energetically expensive system. So when you are stressed and you go into fight or flight, all of that energy gets diverted towards the systems that are going to help you either fight or flee. So when you're in that stressed state, you actually are immunocompromised, so to speak, right? So you downregulate the immune system, okay? Now, if you survive the tiger attack, as my friend Dr. Jim Chestnut likes to say, I love that, you are going to possibly need to heal and repair if you got a scratch on you or you hurt yourself running through the jungle, whatever. Then if you survive that tiger attack, then it's time to put the energy back into the immune system so that you can really repair and heal any wounds and also fight off any infection that you might have picked up along the way. So the energy moves out of the musculoskeletal system and into your digestive tract, reproductive, and also your immune system, right? So now we're in that rest and repair state. So you can see how those two systems are dynamic, and it could absolutely save your life in an acute scenario. The problem is in the modern world, most people are living in a chronic stress state, and that physiology, although can save your life in an acute situation, if you stay in that state, in a chronic state because you're under stress, it can actually really can take your life. It can rob you of life and definitely rob you of health.
Dr. Franson, you bring up a very valid point, and that we all in today's world live constantly under this thing called the stress, and we don't even recognize all the effects that it has had in our system because we're so used to it. And it's like we are constantly are hyper. Now, how is it these stress can cause deficiencies in our musculoskeletal system and in our spine?
So when you're under chronic stress, and those the sources of stress can be what we call the 3 T's: thoughts, toxins, and traumas. When your body is under stress, you stay into that stress state. And over time, as you're in that adaptive physiological state, if you think about it, heart rate stays high, blood pressure stays high, cholesterol levels stay high, circulating sugars stay high, insulin sensitivity drops down, immune system gets down regulated. And if you're under stress, your focus narrows, your learning is reduced. So now we see situations where we have hyperactivity, we have kids who can't focus, right? You can see all the negative implications of these things over time. And of course, our nutrients get exhausted, right? So our body gets into an acidic state, which of course, can affect the quality of the bone, bone density, bone mass, et cetera, right? So I mean, everything, when we stay into this chronic adaptive state, or what's called the allostatic load, as our new normal becomes this high stress state, we are stressed across the board in all of our systems.
Now, we know how that thought plays into this. Obviously, it's all the stresses that come through, our mental capacity. We know what the chemical stresses are, and those are all chemicals that we have been added, unfortunately, or we acquire through eating our food and processed food. Now, when it comes to mechanical stresses, what does our spine play a role in that whole thing?
It's a great question, because what we now understand, there are certain things that will promote us moving into a stress response, and there's certain things that will promote us going into the rest and repair response. One thing we understand is that movement makes a huge difference, whether we're in a stress state or a sympathetic state, or whether we're stuck in a parasympathetic state. So movement, specifically joint movement, there are mechanoreceptors inside of joints that give a feedback into the brain, into the cerebellum. So there's a constant feedback. It's called proprioception. There's a sense, body sense, that stimulates the cerebellum, putting input into the brain that shifts us from this sympathetic state into the parasympathetic state. So we go from the stress response to the rest and repair. So from sympathetic to parasympathetic, movement is actually part of the driving mechanism there. So mechanoreceptors are the highest concentration of mechanoreceptors are found not only in the joints, found in the joints of the spine, and specifically the highest concentration are actually in the neck. So when you have healthy movement of joints, which means activity, exercise, but just healthy movement of joints itself, we're getting that healthy, what's called afferentation or proprioceptive feedback into the brain. And that feedback is what drives that mechanism, takes us from that stress state to the parasympathetic rest and repair state. Now, that's providing that you are exercising, that you're moving your body, that you're staying active. And it's also, those are macro movements. It's also assuming that micro movements are intact, right? So if the joints of your spine specifically are moving properly, those mechanoreceptors get stimulated, and that creates that input into the cerebellum, which drives that mechanism from stress back to healing. So if those mechanoreceptors are sending that proprioceptive impulse into the brain, we are moving our body from a stress state to a healing state. If you have any dysfunction in a joint, you lose that pump, you lose that motion, and you lose that mechanoreceptor input into the brain, right? So now if that problem is in the spine, you're like a problem like subluxation, what ends up happening is you end up with joint dysfunction, and you reduce the amount of proprioceptive input that goes into the cerebellum. So now we're not only not taking the body from that stress state back to back to parasympathetic, but we're also sending noxious stimuli or nociception into that system, which of course drives you further into a stress state. So it's kind of a double whammy there. So if somebody has spinal dysfunction or has a subluxation, it's actually creating a noxious stimuli into the brain. So we have a deficiency in proprioception, which reboots that system and gets you from stress back into resting. And we're also putting noxious stimuli up into the brain, which drives you deeper into that stress response.
Wow. So that basically emphasizes the importance of having your spine examined by a chiropractor and making sure that your spine is manipulated and adjusted by a chiropractor, making sure all those joints move so you get positive response rather than negative response as outcome.
It's the fundamental objective of a chiropractor, is to make sure that the spine itself stays healthy so that the nervous system stays healthy, because this feedback from your body to your brain is such a critical part of the communication that keeps our body functioning optimally. And specifically in this conversation, the nervous system and the immune system functioning optimally. So having your spine checked regularly by a chiropractor to make sure that there is no spinal dysfunction, and that input from your body to your brain that keeps you moving from stress to rest, repair, and relaxation is optimized.
Now, one question that I'm sure you have had it from your practice members is that Doc, nothing is hurting. Why should I come and see you?
So none of the problems that we've described so far have necessarily involved sensory input, right? So, pain input. So we're talking about sensory, okay? So these are two different things. We now know that less than 10% of the nerves are are actually our sensory nerves that sense pain, tickle, touch, etc. Right? So proprioception is a totally different sense in the body. So you could be totally asymptomatic and have this dysfunction happening, and you would have no awareness that you are seeing a reduction in proprioceptive input in the brain, or that you are getting that noxious stimulation into the brain. So there's not necessarily a correlate between symptoms and the presence of this particular lesion.
Perfect. Dr. Franson, I am grateful that you had the time to join us. In closing, you have the mic. Go ahead, give us anything that you need to know. You want basically our listeners and our viewers to know about chiropractic, how it affects our body, and so on.
Yeah, in these crazy times where people are looking for answers, they're looking for solutions, they're looking for something that they can do where they're empowered to actually influence their health outcomes. There's a series of best practices that you can follow for disease reduction, things like hand washing, cleaning surfaces, coughing into your elbow, social distancing, etc. And in extraordinary times, we can practice these things, and that's a good idea. But what most people don't understand is that there are a series of vital behaviors that are health promoting behaviors that you can actually choose to do, so that you can strengthen yourself from the inside out, so that you're not the host that this opportunistic infection is looking for. So, as much as we don't know everything we need to know, or eventually will know about these viruses, there's so much that we do know about what it takes to be a healthy human being. So focus on where you have influence, and make choices that will strengthen your body.
Dr. Franson, I'm grateful for this conversation we had. I know you're a very, very, very busy man. Thank you for joining us, and hopefully we can have you back in another perfect time.
I'd love that. Thanks so much. God bless everybody. Thanks,
Take care. Bye-bye.